That I would say hello and show my face real fast before we get into it. But it's such a pleasure to be here with you all, to be able to present these fascinating stories to you. I started doing research when I was 12, and a few years ago, I kind of stumbled across this particular story. And last year, I really kind of buckled down and did the bulk of this research, which is what I'm going to present to you tonight. So I'll go ahead and stop my video and share the presentation with you. Okay, so the Higueras of Alta California, there are several different Higuera families, and we're going to be talking about one specific family that came from Baja California. So there are a lot of missing parts to the story because many of the records in Mexico have been destroyed. So we really can't go much further back than this particular Higuera, Salvador Higuera, who was a soldier at the Loreto Presidio. We don't really know much about him other than the fact that he was a soldier in Loreto, and here in 1783, either he petitions for a transfer or his superiors tell him, okay, you're going to leave Baja California and you are going to be transferred to Monterrey. This took place in 1783. Nicolas Higuera was probably the firstborn, and he was born there in Baja California. When they arrived in Monterrey, Salvador and his wife, Maria Ursula Lugo, had one other daughter, and the family grew up there in Monterrey, Branciforte. There was another family that arrived about the same time.
Anthony, there seems to be an issue with sound.
On my part?
Well, Moira said she had no sound. Somebody else, I think, turned their microphone on, but I don't know if they're trying to get sound by doing that. So perhaps people could use the chat if you have no sound and just let us know.
Okay. So only one person so far. Moira, can you hear me now? Great. Okay, so if I see another chat pop up, I will address that. So Salvador and his wife, Maria Ursula Lugo, they settle in Monterrey, and Salvador is in the Spanish military. And amongst their neighbors are another couple, Julian Rios and his wife, who is of indigenous ethnicity, Maria Irene. Julian is within the jurisdiction of Monterrey and is stationed at Mission San Luis Obispo as part of the Escolta, which was a detachment of the troops from Monterrey that would protect the missions. And at the time, it was encouraged that the Spanish soldiers marry into indigenous families. So here we have the marriage record of Julian to Irene in 1783. And they had a daughter named Margarita Rios. Margarita was born in San Luis Obispo and baptized there at the mission in 1788. We don't know exactly when she was born. Here's the baptism, and the priest just says that she's recently born, so she could have been a few days old or several months old. In any case, the family is then transferred back up to Monterrey. And so Margarita and Nicolas would have grown up near each other and would have known each other growing up. Here's an interesting record from the Pueblo papers of San Jose, where Julian is saying that his wife, Maria Irene, has been injured, and he's requesting that they stay in San Jose for a time before being moved to Branciforte. So as you can see, the families moved around a lot. And if you know your California geography well, you know that San Luis Obispo to San Jose is quite far for 18th century Spanish and indigenous people. Nicolas and Margarita would have grown up near each other, as I mentioned, and they married sometime around 1804. We don't know exactly when they married, but this baptism is the earliest reference to their being married. We see that the priest lists Nicolas as being the godfather and his wife as being the godmother. Just a few months later, they baptized their first daughter, Marta Higuera, in 1804. So just a few months after that baptism of a godchild, they baptized their own child. These records come from a collection called the Baptisms of the Gente de Razon of Branciforte. Interestingly enough, the reason why we don't know when they were married is because that book of marriages is missing. Mission Santa Cruz kept separate books of baptisms for the indigenous people and for the Spaniards, or the gente de razón. And we only have the baptisms in their actual form, and we have the burials as a transcript, and those are still missing. The originals are still missing. And sadly, the marriage record for Nicolas and Margarita is probably in that book of missing baptisms. Nicolas enlists into the San Francisco Company shortly after they were married. He enlists in 1805, and he serves for a number of years. He serves for 18 years. And as I mentioned earlier, he served in what was called an escolta. An escolta was a group of soldiers sent out from the presidio to protect the missions. And he served at the missions of Santa Clara, Mission San Jose, and in the Pueblo of San Jose. He also served in what was called the Real Hacienda, which is where the government raised their livestock, and that is what would provide the soldiers with their food. It's interesting looking at his enlistment paper here, and this comes from the Bancroft Library. It says that his stature is 5 pies una pulgada y 4 líneas, which is the equivalent of 4 feet and 7 inches. So people, and I've looked at several of these, what are called filiaciones, and it's quite common to see that most men at that time really weren't that tall. 4 feet 7 inches is probably about average height. And then it goes on to give a description of his physical features, that he has brown eyes and a regular nose, etc., etc. And we see also that it lists his parents and where he's from. It says that he's from the Presidio of Loreto. They have a total of 12 children. And here we have just a very simple descendancy chart. Starting from the left, we have Marta in 1804, Jose Ignacio in 1805, Clara in 1808, Anastasia Nicolasa in 1811, Saturnina in 1812, Ignacio in 1814, Lucas in 1817, Josefa in 1818, Encarnacion 1821, Jose Antonio in 1823, and then they had twins. Their last children were twins, Nicolasa and Anastasia in 1825. And it's kind of interesting to see the way they would name children, and often if a child died, they would name maybe the next child or another subsequent child after that deceased child. And the fourth daughter, Maria Anastasia Nicolasa, died probably a few days after she was born. And the last two, the twins, were named after her. After Nicolas had served his time in the San Francisco Presidio, he and his family moved north to what was called the frontier, which is where most of you are probably located right now, in Sonoma. Sometime after the twins were born, and 1834, Margarita dies. There's no record of her death. So we only have a few instances that reference her being deceased by 1834. In 1836, in March, Nicolas is elected as the auxiliary alcalde of Sonoma. and a couple months later was granted the ranch Entre Napa. What was interesting about this particular appointment as auxiliary alcalde is that he was not able to perform his duties because Vallejo said, no one in my jurisdiction is going to have any authority over me. So he was never able to actually practice any of his authority in that jurisdiction. In 1848, Nicolas decides that he was going to sell some of his ranch to Nathan Coombs, a total of 80 acres, which would eventually become the city of Napa. This particular document comes from the Sonoma County Recorder's Office. This comes from the deeds. He sold what would become the city of Napa for $1,050. And of course, at that time, that was quite a bit of money. But I can't help but think to myself, if he would have kept that, knowing what Napa would become, I wonder if he would have sold it for that much or if he would have kept it. But it might have been a wise decision at the time, given that so many of the ranches were taken away from the Mexicans, from the Californios, either through squatters or being taken away through legal fees, having to pay off their legal fees, or just being denied their right to own their property through the courts. Some stories say that Nathan Coombs offered to build an adobe for Nicolas, and that's the way he purchased the property. But maybe there's some truth to that, but this deed indicates that he purchased the 80 acres of land for $1,050. After Margarita dies, Nicolas still had several daughters to raise. None of the male children lived into adulthood. Only the daughters lived into adulthood. And so he marries this woman who is also a widow, who her first husband was a widower. I thought was rather interesting. She marries Nicolas in 1844. And we see in this burial record for her first husband, this very interesting title given to her by the priest. The priest is talking about her first husband, Jose Manuel Briones. He says that he is of the age of about 70 years old, married con la cruel, meaning married to the cruel one. And so I've always wondered, and there's no way to know, sadly, what made her so cruel? What gave her that name? What did she do to deserve such a name? Here we have their marriage, Nicolas and Maria Antonia's marriage in 1844. They're at Mission San Francisco Solano. She was born in Santa Barbara to an indigenous woman from Santa Clara, and her father was a soldier there at the Santa Barbara Presidio. Nicolas is seen here in the 1850 census. He's listed with a real estate value of $10,000 at the time of his death. And he had an estate of cattle, horses, and agriculture that also valued up to $2,810. And so in today's money, that would be quite a bit. And at that time, $10,000 is quite a bit of money. So he did not die poor. At the time of his death, he was in the midst of a court trial. And so when he died, it was rather interesting to find this very tiny report. Often in the newspapers, you have court of sessions reports that would detail what happened that day in the court. And we find this really lovely eulogy by the court reporter. He says, Nicolas Higuera was one of the oldest Spanish inhabitants this side of the bay. I say he was one of the oldest because since the session of the court, he has departed this life. I have understood that he was one among the few Spaniards who was always kind, friendly, and faithful to the Americans. He has gone down to the grave, blossoming with gray hairs, and his good deeds and kindly charities will be remembered by many who have been the recipients of them. He has gone too almost shorn of those vast and valued possessions, which he had long enjoyed as a reward of his services in the cause of his country. Requiescat in pace. I appreciate what he says after that, because he's talking about what's going on in the court that day, the different cases that are going on, and he kind of goes on this little this tangential eulogy. And he even kind of catches himself. He says, I have somewhat digressed from my first purpose in this communication in order to pay a passing tribute to one who has passed from us. So we get an interesting glimpse that we might not always get of the Californios at that time, and that is that he was actually favorable toward the Americans at the time. And I mean, that's probably indicative also in the deed in which he sells part of his land to Nathan Coombs. So a will is recorded in Sonoma. This comes from the Sonoma County Archives. And the will is this is a very interesting case. The will is dictated to Johnson and John B. Horrell and he divided his estate between his two daughters, Marta and Encarnacion. Now, at the time, 6 of his daughters were living, and he chooses to divide all of his possessions between 2 of his daughters. Now, Johnson and his brother were the witnesses to this deed. And forgive me, I don't have it directly in front of me, but one of them, I believe it was Johnson, was the probate judge in Sonoma County, or rather in Napa County, excuse me, at the time, Napa County. And Maria Antonia, the wife, the second wife, La Cruel, she says, hold on, according to state law, the probate judge cannot also be witness to the will, or rather, I should say, the witness to the will cannot be the probate judge. So thinking this might work in their favor, in Maria Antonia's favor and the 4 daughters, they petitioned to have the case moved to Sonoma. However, the will was actually upheld in Sonoma, and everything written in the will was given to the 2 daughters, Marta and Encarnacion. So there we have Nicolas's life. We don't know much more about his life other than that. Just these few little snippets of what he did in the military, what he did in his civic life, some of his possessions, and his demeanor toward the Americans. So we don't really see anything too out of the ordinary with Nicolas, but his daughters have incredible, and this is where it gets very sordid. They have incredible and very sordid lives. Marta Higuera is the oldest daughter, and she's rather interesting. She marries a man named Mariano Frias, and they marry after baptizing their son Nicolas, which is interesting because she seems to be a rather devout Catholic woman, and so to conceive before wedlock seems to go against her ethics, her religious beliefs. But they're married, and then a few months later, few months before their son was born and baptized, and a few months later they were married. Now in 1851, Marta petitions for a divorce from Mariano. And this image right here, I actually just found a couple weeks ago because the collection, the Spanish and Mexican Archives of Monterey, was just put online digitally on Internet Archive. And I suspected that this case was more complete than the one little document I had found several years ago. So I still have not even looked at this in its totality or translated it. But a few things did pop out to me, and it says that she was experiencing a very poor life and that the 2 were fighting constantly. So she petitions for this divorce in May of 1841 and is granted the divorce in June of 1841. And from there, she leaves her husband. They were probably living in San Jose, and she goes back to live with her father, Nicolas. Now, it's interesting because as a devout Catholic woman, she never remarries, and according to canon law, she cannot remarry because she is still technically married to her husband in the eyes of the court. By 1857, she's described as a widow in the baptism of a child named Francisca Molina. So the fact that she's listed as a widow is indicative of the church's view that she's still married. Marta baptized many children, many indigenous children, many California children, family members, friends, neighbors. One of those being this young boy right here, Antonio Valencia, who is also known as Enos. She baptized him at St. John the Baptist in Napa in 1860. Now, he comes back later into her life when she's quite old and has no family to take care of her. And when I first, I knew the story backwards. I knew it that he took care of her, but I didn't know that she was his godmother. And I wondered to myself, what is the connection? And so I pulled up the baptisms, and sure enough, here he is baptized, and there is Marta as his godmother. Here's a photo of Enos taken probably around the 1930s, 1940s. There are very few photos of these people, unfortunately. There are just a handful that I've come across. And it's always so wonderful to actually see these people and to see their see the person in flesh. We see their names in documents all the time, but we don't have images of them. And it's when we do find one, it adds so much to our mental image of them. The other sister, Encarnacion, also experiences spousal abuse, and this turned into a rather lengthy court case. Encarnacion marries a man named Rafael Cacho in 1834 when she's only 13 and he was 22. So 9-year difference. From the time they were married, he starts abusing her, and this became very well known in the community. On Friday morning, February 20th, 1846, she's attacked. Rafael wakes up and he's going about his usual duties. He gets up. It's probably a chilly morning, and he is looking to warm up a little bit. So he drinks aguardiente, which is a type of alcohol. He goes out probably to check the fields and to check the cattle. And while he's out doing that, two indigenous men come to the house, and they knock on the door, and I don't know exactly what they wanted, but Encarnacion ends up selling the aguardiente to them for an unknown price. When Rafael comes back, he found that there were 2 pesos missing from what she had sold them, and this caused him to fly off the handle. He begins to verbally abuse her, and this continues to escalate into a physical attack with a belduque, which is a long pointed knife. He attacks her 3 different times, and this results in a gash on the head, a pretty severe cut in the buttocks, and a stab wound to the chest. As this is happening, an indigenous woman named Ascension steps in, and she stops him. And I find this to be a wonderful act of bravery on the part of Ascension to get in between Rafael and Encarnacion. And she basically tells him, you have to stop this. And, he yells at her and tells her to leave and get out. But this was enough to stop the attack. And Ascension helps Encarnacion into bed, where she was able to recuperate. The next day, Rafael leaves for Rancho San Jeronimo, which is down in Sausalito, to find remedies for the attack. But while he's gone, before he left, he said, "Do not tell anyone about this." Probably he made some threats. If you tell anyone, I will do X, Y, and Z. But while he's gone, Encarnacion's brother-in-law Angel comes by, and probably just stopping by on his way back home, and he observes that his sister-in-law has been attacked. So she asks him, please go to the authorities and tell them what's happened. Rafael was apprehended and held in custody in Yerba Buena in San Francisco till at least May of 1826. He petitions the courts to let him go because he needs to take care of his family, which I find rather ironic because in the process of taking care of his family, he's also abusing his family. And he's saying, I need to go check on the cattle. I need to go check on the fields. The paper trail ends here, unfortunately. We don't know what happens to him, but he totally vanishes after this incident. The next sister, Josefa, has an even crazier story, if you can believe it. Josefa has her first child, Jose Polonio, in 1833. She was only 14 years old and she was an unwed mother. In 1836, just 3 years later, she marries Jose Cordero, whose filiación or enlistment paper is here before you. He is a soldier in the San Francisco company, but he's from Santa Barbara. So she marries him. Josefa and Jose have their first child 4 months after being married. And I can't help but wonder to myself, did Nicolas say, look, you already had one child out of wedlock, you have to marry this guy? So they marry in 1836. They have their first child 4 months later, Marcelina de Guadalupe. They go on to baptize 3 more children, Adelaida, who actually was recorded by Charles Lummis when he did his wax cylinder recordings. She performed some songs for him, and we have those recordings digitized now. We can actually hear her voice. So the 3 children were Adelaida, Perpetua Concesa, and Desiderio Alonso. Jose totally disappears after 1845. We have no record of a death, of anything that happened to him. He's just totally gone. So after he disappears, Josefa has 2 more daughters out of wedlock. She has Maria Nicolasa and Maria Isabella. Now here it's probably a good idea to look at this chart because it starts to get a little confusing here. Excuse me. So here we have, over on the left side, we have Josefa, Maria Josefa. And then we have on the right side, this Berriasa family. We have Nicolas Berriasa at the top, and he has a son named Jose de los Reyes, and he has a son named Jose de los Santos. Now, this Jose de los Santos pops up in a record, and he is basically saying, I want custody of my 2 children. When I read this and I read the names, and I was kind of blown away because one of the children is the supposed daughter of Josefa's missing husband, and the other daughter is an illegitimate daughter. So here we have this court document. This comes from the Sonoma County Justice Court records that are at the State Archive. And we have these 2 daughters of Josefa and Jose de los Santos. So he's asking for custody of them. Maybe Josefa wasn't able to take care of them, and he said, you know, I can give them a better life. It's very uncertain what happened, but it's very fascinating as we continue looking in the records. And at first I thought, yeah, maybe this there's a mistake. But then I found this letter that was dictated to General Vallejo by Josefa to Jose de los Santos, and she's saying in this letter, our daughter wants to get married, and I'm entrusting her into your care. I'm entrusting this decision into your care. You make the decision whether she can be married or not. And she refers to Perpetua Concesa as nuestra hija, our daughter. So you have the one court record where he's acknowledging that this is their daughter. And then you have this letter here where she's acknowledging that Perpetua is their daughter. Perpetua actually did not marry this man, Mr. Wilson. That's all we know is his name. She ended up marrying Felix Matthews, who worked for the United States government abroad, and they lived a rather exotic life. From what I've seen, they were married in 1859, and he became the consul general of the U.S. in Tangier. So now we need to look again at these people because more of the Berriosas start to come into play. So we see back on the right side, Nicolas Berriesa, and we see Jose de los Reyes, and we see Jose de los Santos. Now we have another brother of Jose de los Reyes, Nazario Berriesa. He has two sons named Jose de Jesus and Sisto. Jose de Jesus and Sisto marry two of Josefa's sisters. Jose de Jesus marries Anastasia, and Sisto marries Nicolasa. Now, this is where it gets rather chaotic to me. I came upon this marriage record in Martinez at St. Catherine's, and this is a marriage record for Salvador Berriesa, and Salvador says that his parents are Sisto Berriesa and Josefa Higuera. And I thought to myself when I saw this, oh, the priest must have messed up. He must have met Nicolasa because Sisto married Nicolasa, not Josefa. But then I kept digging a little more, and I found this baptism at Mission San Francisco Solano, Mission Sonoma. And this is a baptism for a Salvador who is an illegitimate daughter of Josefa. So the record was right. The priest was right. Sisto and Josefa, brother and sister-in-law, had an affair, and Salvador was their child. Now, I found this in a trip to Northern California in 2016, and when I pieced this together, this is what kind of brought this entire story together, and has really helped to motivate me to look into all of the siblings and to find these incredible stories. So Salvador is baptized there at Mission San Francisco Solano by the Bishop of San Francisco, Joseph Sadek Alemany, and he was a Dominican who was originally from Spain and then was stationed or sent to Monterey rather, and then ended up in the East Bay. In an attempt to provide for his child, I found this to be very interesting. Sisto sells lot 36, which is very near the plaza of Sonoma. He sells this plot of land to Josefa 3 months before Salvador was born for 7,200 pesos. And I can imagine that Sisto said, this is probably my child. I probably need to support him. I need to support Josefa. So they take this property and they live there in Sonoma. And Sisto, goes back with his wife, and I can only imagine what the tensions were in the family between sisters and between husband and wife. But somehow they all stayed together, and there were no more divorces. Josefa meets a young man, 6 years younger than her, actually, in the early 1850s, named Harold Camp. Harold Camp is from Sweden. He arrives in New York in 1846, and he joins Stevenson's regiment. They leave and arrive 6 months later in Sonoma. There's no marriage record found for Harold and Josefa, so it's presumed that they were probably common law spouses. Harold was a merchant by trade, but then switched professions and became a farmer, and then switched professions again when he moved his family from Sonoma to Martinez in 1868. He goes from a merchant to a farmer to a saloon keeper. He opens a saloon in Martinez, and he gets in trouble. He gets in trouble in 1873 for selling liquor to an indigenous man. And at the time, California state law prohibited the sale of liquor to any habitual or common drunkard or Indian. It's not known whether he really served any time or if he paid any fine, but we know he was charged with this crime. It's important to look at this tree one more time. So we look back to the right and we see Nicolas Berriesa and his two sons, Nazario and Jose de los Reyes. Now let's look at Nazario Berriesa and his family. So we'd already talked about Jose de Jesus and how he married Josefa's sister Anastasia. And we talked about Sisto and how he married Josefa's sister Nicolasa and how he had an affair with Josefa. But there's another brother named Martin Berryessa who was living in Martinez at the time, and he has a son named Jose Reyes Berryessa. So if you're looking at this chart, you'll see that Salvador Berryessa, who was the illegitimate son of Sisto Berryessa and Josefa, is on the same generational level as Jose Reyes Berryessa. They're first cousins. Now, if we go back and look over toward the left, we'll see that Josefa has a relationship with Jose de los Santos, and then next to that is Sisto Berryessa, and next to that is Harold Camp. So she's with her common law husband, Harold Camp, and they have several children, but they have a son named Louis Camp. Now, Louis is in no way related to Jose Reyes Berryessa, other than the fact that his half-brother, Salvador, is Jose Reyes's cousin, first cousin. Now, hopefully this isn't confusing you all too much, because it can get rather confusing. Jose Reyes is a rather notorious figure in Martinez. He's known for running amok through town as a dangerous man feared by the community, as some newspapers described him. An argument breaks out between Jose Reyes and Louis Camp. And this takes place in May 1878. This argument occurs and emotions simmer, but things were not forgotten. Reyes sees Louis again in the street, and he confronts him, and he starts arguing with him in Spanish, and Jose Reyes then attacks Louis. Some bystanders noticed this kerfuffle and this fight taking place, and they call over the sheriff, Sheriff Gift, and the sheriff starts to separate them and trying to keep them apart and keep them from this fight that's ensuing on the streets. As things kind of simmer down, Reyes breaks loose and he starts to lunge at Louis, and Louis, ready for what was probably about to happen, reaches into his pocket, pulls out a gun, and kills Jose Reyes. So he essentially kills his half-brother's first cousin. Now, this was quite a scandal, quite an ordeal in Martinez, and very shortly thereafter, the family leaves Martinez and they move down to Ventura. Now, my only guess why they moved down to Ventura is because Josefa's first husband, Jose Cordero, who we talked about earlier, his family was from Santa Barbara, and Santa Barbara and Ventura aren't terribly far apart. So here we have this little newspaper article where the citizens of Ventura must have found out that, oh, this new neighbor of ours killed someone, and they must have been rather leery of that. So they reach out to the citizens, to the residents of Contra Costa County in Martinez, and they request any information about him. Can you tell us, is he a good guy? And so they write a letter, which was called a certificate of good character, basically saying, look, Louis killed this guy in self-defense. He's a good young man, and there's nothing to worry about. So the family arrives there in 1880, 2 years after the killing. Harold dies in 1899, and Josefa dies in 1902, presumably living a rather calm life once they arrive in Ventura. But maybe further research will show that they didn't. The next sister, Clara, the one who was one of the four sisters who didn't get any of her father's inheritance, she marries a man named Anastasio Cortez when she was 16. Anastasio was a soldado from San Blas, from Baja California. What's interesting about him is he goes by two different names. He goes by Cortez and he goes by Talamantes. And he dies in 1839 of a stab wound. And the priest notes two things. He notes that he goes by these two different names, which I think is interesting that the priest would note that. And the other thing that's interesting to note about this particular document is that the local magistrate is requesting a copy of this certificate. So maybe there could have been foul play with this stab wound, or it could have been an accident. There are no further details, unfortunately. By 1845, Clara marries Angel Bojorquez, who was the brother-in-law who witnessed the wounds on Encarnacion, as we had talked about earlier. No marriage record is found for them, but their children are always listed as legitimate children, which is interesting. The priests would have known these people very well, and they would have known if they were married. So you can only have a legitimate child if you were married in the church. So there must have been some marriage that took place, but unfortunately that's missing. Clara dies in 1873. Her husband Angel dies a few years before in 1868. They're both buried in Calvary Cemetery in Petaluma. The last two sisters, the twins, Maria Nicolasa and Maria Anastasia, they married, as we talked about earlier, the two brothers, Jose de Jesus and Sisto. They were grantees of the Rancho Rio de los Putos in Sonoma, or rather, I'm sorry, in Solano County. The twins lived rather uneventful lives from the written record, or from the lack of written record, I should say. There's no death record for Anastasia, but Nicolasa dies in 1879. And we have this one little obituary that talks about her death. It mentions at the bottom, this land grant gradually passed into the hands of Americans until now, but little or none remains in the possession of the grantees. And this was the case for most of the Californios. So here are the stories of the Higuera family. They're rather complex, as you can see from the relationships that they had with each other. They're indicative of the people that were living in Northern California at the time, and they're an indictment, I think, on humanity that we don't really change too much. We look at our lives now as being very complex and very, very chaotic and sordid, and we hear of crimes, and we hear of relationships falling apart, or different circumstances arising, and we think to ourselves, they had it so easy back then. But from these records, we find that they did not have it easy back then. They experienced violence, they experienced devastation, death. They experienced a loss of family and of land and property and homes. But through it all, the thing that amazes me most is that they were resilient and that they persevered through it. They were strong women. They were very strong women to endure these hardships perpetrated against them by their husbands, and to not just survive, but to actually fight against it. To see Marta say, "No, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to pursue a divorce," which in mid-19th century Mexican California is almost unheard of. And then to see her sister press charges against her husband. To see Josefa just lead her own life, saying, "You know, I'm going to enjoy my life," and in the process of that, she has many children. So these are the stories. I hope you enjoyed them. I'm open to taking any questions at this time, and I hope you all enjoyed it and learned a little something about your 19th century neighbors.
Well, thank you very much. If anyone wants to ask questions, please unmute yourself and ask the question. I'm going to actually ask a question of Peter Meyerhoff. Peter, don't we have that Berryessa deed on lot 36? I thought we looked at that the other day.
I can't remember offhand. I think we did.
Yeah. It was the corner. It was where the creamery is now, and
oh yes, yes, we have deeds for that property.
So,
what exactly is there now? I'm very curious. I'd love to drive by and see it next time I'm there.
There is a creamery that it's a restaurant now. It was a creamery at one time. It's right across from the Mission. And then next door to it was a hotel. It's made out of a local plum stone. And then the Blue Wing Inn is on the back of the property.
Got it. Now, that was just one law amongst many that I had found in the deeds, but that one really stuck out to me because it was Sisto who had sold it to her. Other plots of land were sold by various other people in the area, but that one really struck me because of who it was and when it was given to her or sold to her.
Well, we can, I'll email you a copy of the document.
Great, thank you.
I have another question. I know a few daughters of, a few sons of Caetano Juarez in Napa married women with the last name Higuera. And I just
Yes.
assumed these were daughters of Nicolas, but if not, I wonder whose parents, who were their parents?
So that Higuera is actually not related to this family that I've been able to find. There were several Higuera families that ended up in Northern California. A lot of them also came with the De Anza party. Some of them, I should say, came with the De Anza party from Sinaloa. So they're not all necessarily related. And that can make it tricky when looking at these records because you see a name and you think, oh, this is part of what I'm researching, but you dig a little bit deeper and you realize, oh no, this is one of the other Higuera families.
I'm surprised they were in Napa, but I guess that's just coincidence.
It is just coincidence, oddly enough.
I have a question, if I can ask it. This is Bob Allwit. You showed several newspaper clippings and made other references, articles with dates as late as into the 1850s, which referenced Mission San Francisco Solano. Now, when did that mission become a parish church? I thought it was earlier than that. And was the terminology just continued, even though it was no longer a mission?
So most of the missions became parishes right about the American period. I would have to take a look at the title page of the Book of Baptisms to see if it maybe says parroquia or if it still says misión. But most of the missions, as I mentioned, right about that American period. And then that's also when you start to see other parishes start to pop up. So the first one in the area was St. Dominic's in Benicia. And then St. Vincent de Paul is another early one in Vallejo. St. John the Baptist in Napa, 1850s. St. Vincent de Paul in Petaluma, that one's an early one. So they all start to pop up. A lot of these start to pop up in the 1850s, and that's about the time when Mission San Francisco Solano was elevated to a parish status.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for our speaker?
I'm just wondering how one can obtain or how one can search records of the San Francisco Solano Church in Sonoma. You would think it would be easy, but I know I've been unable to get anywhere with at least finding the right person to talk to.
Sure. So
how did you proceed?
Prior to 1840, those sacramental records, those are the first books, and those are kept at the Bancroft Library. So if you're looking prior to 1840, excuse me, those would be at the Bancroft Library. Post 1840, they are kept at San Francisco Solano Parish. If you call the office and they say, if they give you any trouble about looking at them, what I typically do is I will reach out to the diocese. I forget the Vicar General's name. I believe his name is Father Moses Brown, maybe, but he was very helpful for me when I was doing this research last year. when I'd been trying to get into St. John the Baptist in Napa for quite some time and always was met with resistance. So I reached out to the Vicar General for the Diocese of Santa Rosa, Father Moses, and he had sent an email on my behalf saying, Anthony's doing some research on these early families. Would you be able to let him go in and look at the records, and kind of vouching for my research? So I would recommend reaching out to the Vicar General and explaining what project you're working on, and asking if he would reach out to the parish on your behalf to set that up. I can send you his contact information, Peter. I can email that to you. I thought I'd mention real quickly some of the sources that I used to compile this. I'm sure a lot of you here are researching various topics and maybe particular families there in Sonoma, or your own families. So some of the records that I used were the church records, of course, newspaper records, and there are several different websites that are make a lot of these articles very accessible. California Digital Newspapers Collection is one. Newspapers.com is one. The Bancroft Library has all of General Vallejo's papers, the Documentos para la Historia de California, and those are all online on Internet Archive. There are 16 volumes in that collection, and they're spread out through, I think, 30-something microfilm reels, but they're all digitized and you can look through them. And those include, excuse me, military records, personal correspondences, governmental records. And those records really help to flesh some of this out, such as the record that was, or the letter rather, that was dictated to Vallejo. That was part of that collection. The military enlistment records, those were part of that collection. The Pueblo Papers in San Jose is another wonderful collection. The Spanish-Mexican Archive in Monterey is another wonderful collection. As I mentioned, that just recently went online. 16 volumes of over 1,000 pages each. So you've got nearly 20,000 documents that just went online. The Pueblo Papers are also online. Court records, as I mentioned, deeds and wills and probates, those all help to flesh this out. So there are a lot of records that can be used to help kind of give you a picture of what's going on, and then you kind of have to fill in the gaps, so to speak.